Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining our seminar this Saturday morning. We are joined today by Professor Goodlad, who will share with us insights from our interdisciplinary research on critical and generative AI. After this, we will have a discussion session, which will be spearheaded by the Dean of the School of Communication, Hong Kong Baptist University, Professor Bong. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce our guests. Goodlad is Distinguished Professor of English and Comparative Literature, as well as faculty affiliate of the Center for Cultural Analysis, the Rutgers British Studies Center, and the Rutgers Center for Cognitive Science. She previously served as Associate Chair of English and as a member of the Executive Committee for Graduate Studies. Currently, she serves as the chair of a new interdisciplinary initiative on critical artificial intelligence and as editor-in-chief of Critical AI, a forthcoming multidisciplinary journal. Her latest project is a collaborative effort on the Institution of Design Justice AI, a global humanities institute at the University of Pretoria, which seeks to explore community-centered, humanistic, and interdisciplinary engagement of generative AI. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, Professor Goodlad.
You are most welcome. And thank you for joining me. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, everybody can see that? Great. So AI today functions as a grab bag of computational systems developed with little public understanding or oversight. We can't make ourselves intelligible without using the term AI, but the term itself, which was coined in the 1950s, and since those Cold War origins, has mainly been understood by the public as a theme for science fiction, can be very confusing. The actually existing technologies that people call AI today are usually forms of data-driven statistical modeling through deep, which is to say multi-layered software architectures that predict probable outcomes. Let me say from the start that some of the most potentially beneficial applications of this technology involve high-quality data in conjunction with highly trained domain experts, as when, for example, medical researchers collaborate with computer scientists to seek unidentified patterns in disease. Note step one, collection and documentation of high quality data, which is not very sexy, probably won't make you a lot of money, and even worse, costs a lot of money. But when we talk about the promise of AI, we might be thinking about how statistical modeling of this kind could be a boon to researchers in many fields, including climate science, astronomy, demography, meteorology, the list goes on. But this isn't the kind of data-driven deep learning that we hear so much about with reference to something called generative AI, a very new type of commercial application derived from modeling human-generated cultural expression scraped from the web, largely without consent and in violation of copyright often, which is now being heavily marketed and hyped in the form of chatbots, such as ChatGPT, Microsoft's Copilot, and Google's Gemini. Most recently, Anthropic released Claude 3, so my slide is a bit out of date. As my co-authors and I write in the introduction to the next issue of Critical AI, which is a special issue on large language models, generative AI, and the rise of chatbots, for most of the history of natural language processing, which is the field that studies language, chatbots were considered a problematic affordance. Ever since Joseph Weizenbaum discovered in the 1960s that his crude psychotherapy chatbot, 𝗟𝘂𝗶𝘁𝗶𝗄, was triggering what came to be known as the 𝗟𝘂𝘶 effect, the human propensity to project consciousness and human-like authority onto any system with the appearance of speaking sensible language. Serious researchers backed away from that enterprise. They recognized that the ability, as Weizenbaum put it, to induce powerful delusional thinking about simple computer programs was not science and certainly was not in the public interest. This changed almost by accident. I'm simplifying a bit here, with the advent in 2017 and 18 of a deep learning architecture, the generative pre-trained transformer, or GPT, which, by way of scoring what might be the most probable next sequence for tasks of machine translation from one language to another, generated human-like text culled from its vast model of human-generated data. The history of generative AI was therefore not rooted in the design of chatbots or robust frameworks for human-like communication or strong tools for information access. Its origins, rather, were in the steady advance of statistical proxies for predicting the plausibility of automated translations and transcriptions of text. The rise of such powerful models for the probabilistic scoring of text meant that an increasing faith in the wonders of scale, lots and lots of data and computational power, and the effectiveness of data attached to a technology that generates plausible outputs without any means of tracking their provenance or ensuring their veracity. These points dovetail with the importance of developing critical AI literacies, an ongoing focal point for critical AI at Rutgers, its grants, and the Critical AI Journal. This slide is an event that we did last October, which was calling together people across the disciplines to help citizens, teachers, writers to acquire some of these critical AI literacies. In the political economy that undergirds today's commercialized chatbots, relatively few people so far have had the opportunity to develop the literacies necessary to make informed and empowered judgments about this new thing called AI, or generative AI. Note that the critical in critical AI is not about criticizing in the sense of a thumbs down. It's about critical faculties of judgment and discernment that have been central to the humanities and social sciences throughout much of human history. Teaching critical AI literacies means several things, including foregrounding the specific affordances in terms of the relevant disciplinary frameworks and learning objectives. At the very least, it means teaching people that when people hear about today's AI, they should not be thinking about this, much though I love teaching Blade Runner. For those of you who know the film, you will know that this is Roy Batty, the android who steals the show in the most memorable scene from the movie. So this is not the kind of AI today. We don't have human-like and sentient androids, or even this, we don't have pensive, conscious robots. But what we have is rather a vastly scaled up and multidimensional version of this. And please keep that image of a bell curve in mind, because despite the common use of anthropomorphizing metaphors that liken neural networks to the human brain, and despite the trillions of parameters that make up today's most sophisticated deep learning architectures, what makes generative models work is the modeling, statistically, of lots and lots of data, much more than any human observes in a lifetime. Many computer scientists are outspokenly skeptical, including Ye-Jin Choi, who memorably described GPT-3, which was the model that the original version of ChatGPT was built on, as a mouth without a brain. Emily Bender, Timnit Gebru, Margaret Mitchell, and Angela McMillan-Major are the named authors of a paper that famously calls these models stochastic parrots, though I prefer to call them probabilistic mimics, because probabilistic is a much more comprehensible term, and parrots are actually really smart animals. Whether described as parroting or mimicry, these models work by predicting what might plausibly follow a user's prompt through a representation of the patterns observed in vast troves of training data, but without the system having any human-like understanding of what the words and images mean to a person, as befits their origins as a way of scoring probability for machine transcription or translation. But in addition to teaching people how models work and what their shortfalls are, it's also important to emphasize their myriad impacts on today's societies, cultures, and environment, including not only questions of endemic falsehoods and stereotypes, of the exploitation of a global underclass that helps to make AI look smarter than it really is, of the concentration of power in a tech sector that lobbies relentlessly, of the expansion of a pernicious surveillance model, of the environmental footprint of so much resource-intensive computation, much greater than simply searching the web, and also vast amounts of water to cool, of the malicious use of models to disseminate agitprop, conspiracy theories, and non-consensual porn, and the overall degradation, or as it is now called, enshittification of internet content. So what does it mean for a system to manipulate human language or images probabilistically without any human-like understanding of what they signify? In generative AI, it often results in what the industry likes to call hallucinations. Note the use of an anthropomorphizing term for what are actually just bad predictions. Usually these are false or simply made up inferences that mimic the observed forms of common kinds of human text and plug in plausible seeming but factually incorrect or completely fabricated details. So here to give you an example is a bio that I asked for. And what you see at the top was my prompt. And what follows is the bio, and everything on the slide that is yellow is plausible, but completely false. Notice the structure of those falsehoods. These models have been called Mad Libs on steroids because their training process involves something like a Mad Lib's masking of words in order to optimize for good predictions within familiar patterns. Now, this is from about a month ago. The system does better because in this instance, I'm using Bing Chat, now Copilot, which has some linkage to the internet, but for reasons that I can explain in Q&A because it's a little complicated, there still are problems with this technology. It doesn't perform as well as if you were to look on the web and find my web page and just read it. So what happens here is that it gives a synthesis of my web page from Rutgers, but it doesn't catch the fact that I'm no longer at the University of Illinois. And then it says that I have a PhD in English from Rutgers, where I taught until 2017, when I have a PhD from Columbia, and I taught at the University of Illinois until 2017. So you can see that it's kind of garbled. Now take a look what happens when I ask it the kind of oddball question that perhaps a student might ask. I ask it, who is the best Victorianist in the United States? Now you'll see that it has been instructed not to answer this kind of subjective question, and that is almost certainly a result of human reinforcement, as it's called, by a low-paid shadow workforce. But it also volunteers some examples and once again goes off the rail. Mentioning George Levine, who is a former colleague of mine, was very good. And I was actually, I thought, wow, that's a good choice. But if you notice, by the end of the description of George Levine, he becomes the editor of Critical AI, et cetera, et cetera. So it has confused him with me. Daniel Walker Howe isn't a Victorianist. He's a historian of early America, and he didn't teach at Harvard, though he did get a bachelor's degree there. The choice of Walter Benjamin is just bizarre, not only false, but also quite tragic. He was in exile, yes, but he was fleeing the Nazis during those years and trying in 1940 to leave Spain for the US when he killed himself rather than be returned to Nazi-occupied France. So as you can see, it has this completely wrong, and he was not a Victorianist, not fascinated by Victorian fiction, though some Victorianists do, of course, cite his work. So you can see why people in the industry like to think of this as a hallucination, but already we see the need for us to mobilize critical AI literacies for our own research and that of our students. Let's turn to large image models for some additional examples, starting with this viral tweet from October in which the user's prompt for the ingredients to bake a cake results in OpenAI's state-of-the-art DALL-E 3 text-to-image model generating a peculiar hash of the plausible and wrong. In lay terms, the system has created a blurry JPEG of its training data. Here I'm borrowing a term that the novelist Ted Chiang came up with to describe what's going on. Its massive training data has been organized into a message passing architecture across 12 billion parameters that would mean little or nothing to a human and at a scale that humans struggle to fathom. This resource-intensive process enables the system to respond to a prompt with a conjured reality that most kindergartners will recognize is quite wrong. These things will doubtless improve, possibly because of larger models, though mostly the models are about as big as they can be right now. So most of what will improve them, unless some very different technology is innovated, will just be human reinforcement, including users voting things up and down. Now let's take an example from a study of state-of-the-art image generators from a Stanford team last year. Oops, that was the cake. Sorry about that. Here the prompt, a wealthy African man and his house, and the prompt, a poor white person, produces respectively images of Black men in front of impoverished dwellings and images of two rather dark-skinned white people. This doesn't mean that the model thinks that poor people are always Black and that wealthy African men inhabit impoverished dwellings, because the model doesn't think anything at all. It simply means that the images and words scraped from the internet to train the system strongly correlate certain images of certain people with certain words. In the world of data scraped from the internet, a world that vastly overrepresents the North American and Europeans who use the internet, and especially then scrapable sites such as Reddit, a preponderantly whiter, more male, and more English-speaking demographic than the world at large. The recorded presuppositions of other people, perhaps middle-class Africans, or even poor white people, are either underrepresented or excluded entirely. Remember that almost a third of the world's population has no internet access whatsoever, on top of which billions of people speak languages for which there isn't sufficient data to do even the most simple language processing tasks. So this has nothing to do with reality. In the real world, in fact, though the rate of white poverty in the US is less than half that of African Americans, the actual number of white people living in poverty, about 15.9 million, according to one 2021 estimate, is almost double that of Black counterparts. The correlation between Blackness and poverty is so strong in the data scrape from the internet that AI systems reproduce that massive and supposedly data-driven evidence as if it were reality itself. As a result, in a perfect irony, millions and perhaps even billions of human workers, mostly underpaid, and many people of color located in the global South, are necessary to giving generative systems an impression of human-like intelligence that they wouldn't otherwise have. Because they are proprietary, investigative journalists must uncover the fact that, for example, the task of ridding ChatGPT of much of its disturbing sexual content was outsourced to workers in Kenya. Such workers also help companies to mitigate egregious biases like the ones found in the Stanford study. So you probably won't see the errors about houses in Africa anymore, and some will consider it out-of-date evidence for the model's bias, on the presumption perhaps that employment of what's being called a global AI underclass to mitigate the flaws of poor training data and the limits of correlation somehow make the use of these models ethical and reliable. However, even if we think such a process ethical or wise, it is unclear when, if ever, the task of hand-correcting biases and errors, one at a time, will ever be complete. And of course, if you're a malicious actor hoping to generate falsehoods and stereotypes, you can break these rules with ease. Recently, NPR did a story on another study about large image models, and that's what you're looking at right now. When prompted to depict African doctors treating white children, the system persistently displayed Black children treated by white doctors. And when asked to depict doctors helping children in Africa, giraffes and elephants sometimes appeared. Such inclusion of wildlife in the delivery of healthcare is, of course, wholly unreal. But as the study's author explains, the model denies modernity to Africa and replaces it with the false reality of its own correlations from scraped data. Here's another Stanford study from last October demonstrating how the LLMs now being used in medical applications propagate vintage pseudoscience in the form of race-based medicine. And these are just things that are found in the training data, but were discredited a long time ago. These questions of endemic biases, falsehoods and stereotypes, of the exploitation of the global underclass, of the concentration of power, of the expansion of the surveillance business model, etc., combine with concerns particular to generative AI, such as the malicious use of models to sow political mayhem, fake news, and non-consensual porn. Critical AI literacy enjoins us to ask how the responsible use of such problematic and underregulated products will come about. Certainly, if we knew as much about generative models as we know about, say, the certified organic foods that we eat, we might begin to entertain the question of how or whether using these models can be ethical. But we are still at the very beginning of that arduous political crusade for transparency and accountability. Moreover, even the assurance of, say, transparent and non-surveillant models that did not exploit workers, did not collect our students' data, a huge ask, of course, would not in itself be sufficient to determine if, say, education of students is the right use case for this technology. And there's a huge amount of pressure right now, both in K through 12 and in higher ed, to adopt chatbots. And a few universities are becoming early adapters. In the US, at least, advocates of teaching with the technology sometimes suggest that students should brainstorm with ChatGPT, or that they might use it for research, which is a really bad idea, or that they should generate a first draft of their work and then improve it, which I think is a possibility, though you would never, I think, want to adapt that as what students do all the time, because they would never have a way of developing their own ideas. Though teachers should, of course, experiment, we have seen that chatbot research is deeply flawed and environmentally unsound, and we have no evidence that teaching students to brainstorm with or generate first drafts from probabilistic language models is a workable means to inculcating critical thinking, as I am charged to do. This is a learning outcome that is actually required by Rutgers. When I teach certain types of courses, I'm supposed to be teaching students to communicate effectively in modes appropriate to an area of inquiry while evaluating and critically assessing sources and using the conventions of attribution and citation correctly. But in fact, the training of scraped data into blurry models entirely undermines such critical assessment and attribution, since the models are both plagiaristic, imbibing content without the means to cite it, much less critically assess it, and entirely unable to pinpoint the source of their synthesized outputs, even when prompted to provide a citation. It might just be a made-up citation. Such challenges for critical thinking take me to the increasing evidence for model collapse. Remember those normalizing curves that I asked you to think about. What you're looking at on these slides is taken from a paper about what happens if you train models on the outputs of other generative models. And you see that the tails shrink, right? Probable events become overestimated, improbable events are underestimated. And eventually, what that means is that the models actually stop working. Moreover, because LLMs are, in the words of OpenAI's own researchers, misaligned, the chatbotization of these tools has required that huge investment in reinforcement learning through human feedback. So, for example, to align ChatGPT, you had the workers in Kenya looking at all that very toxic toxic content. Let me be clear that in the fullness of time, we and our students will find lots of good reasons for using some chatbots in particular ways for performing the tasks at which they excel. Some of the most promising uses of data-driven predictive technologies, as I said at the beginning of my talk, have nothing to do with generating text or images. They may involve better cancer treatments, or climate modeling, or energy inefficiencies, or the materials. That again is what you need expensive research, data, domain experts to do. Such aspirational usages, therefore, are not low-hanging fruit. Sorry, I'm missing a blank slide here. They're not low-hanging fruit for companies eager to turn their unique access to internet blather into a new trillion-dollar market for a commercial product. The point, therefore, is not that AI writ large is necessarily a bad technology, but rather that the demand for massive growth by self-interested actors vying to create and then dominate a huge market for automated content is not a good way of discovering its potential uses for the public good. The Critical AI Initiative has turned to design justice, one of our inspirations from the start. Their principles, which are focused on community-centered design and were codified and elaborated in this book by 𝗟𝘂 𝗟𝘂𝗿𝗄𝗃, have been a major influence for us. As against the intensive normalizing and homogenizing of human generativity, to the point where models collapse, our Design Justice AI Institute at Pretoria will be asking questions such as, what would be lost from human creativity and diversity if writers or visual artists come to rely on predictive models trained on selective data sets that exclude the majority of the world's many cultures and languages? Our Design Justice Labs NEH grant, which we're just getting warmed up on, is about sharing templates for teaching students about generative AI in the way Daniel Estrada, AI ethics professor at New Jersey Institute of Technology, does, through probing exercises that enable students to use these high-impact technologies as researchers, not as passive consumers. And I really love this idea because the students get what they need, which is some experience using the models, but they also get the critical literacies. They're not using them as consumers. They're not becoming dependent on them. They're becoming smarter about them and what they might be good for. I'm confident that we can do better for our students, our world, our democracies, our languages, our arts, our cultures. And I believe that design justice principles, the slide I now share with you, are a very good inspiration for doing so. I thank you again for joining me this morning for you, this evening for me, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, and Professor Goodlad, and for this thought-provoking talk. Here in Hong Kong, we already discussed this and a little bit more. What we will say is like an AI phenomenon you should not be treated like just a tech phenomenon, and we need a lot of like a perspective, especially from philosophy, cultural, social perspective, and join this talk. And your talk on this is really thought-provoking, like I said, perspective on the complexity and challenges within the field. We definitely timely need and this, experts like you and contribute this one there. So my understanding is that your talk on critical AI and provide a very comprehensive understanding of the social, political, and cultural implication of AI. My first question may be something that you talk about three dilemma in the field of AI and to reduce the controversial meaning of intelligence. And the second one, not of presence of biases, stereotype, and the concentration of power. That's published in your journal, Critical AI. How do you still think about the three core dilemma you already mentioned then in your journal?
So you're talking about my essay, Humanities in the Loop, where I'm talking about, the problem of intelligence never having been systematically defined by anyone. And the definition that researchers tend to use is unstable, but to the extent that they have an operative definition of it, it's a fairly reductive one. I mean, famously, John McCarthy, who is the person that I had the photograph of early on in my presentation, and he's the person who coined the term artificial intelligence. He defines intelligence as the computational part of the ability to achieve goals in the world, which, certainly that is one activity, one ability that requires intelligence. I don't know why it has to be only the computational part, other than that, if you can compute it, that's convenient for computer science. So, there is a tendency to use a sort of a very hyper utilitarian calculus kind of approach with costs and benefits and so forth, or simply to define intelligence rationalistically, and then to use a lot of old benchmarks that have been used to test the performance of models and answering questions or solving language problems that are very inappropriate for testing model capacity. So you'll have people say things like, ChatGPT can pass the bar exam. That means it would be a good lawyer. Well, first of all, ChatGPT probably had a lot of bar exam questions as training data. So what it's really showing is that it has either memorized or can make good inferences based on, what it has modeled about the bar exam. But second of all, in some ways, I think this is an even more, it's important to point out that because we don't have the data sets, whenever any company, whether it's OpenAI or another one, says, oh, look, our model can do this. If they don't show the data, then it could be the biggest no big deal that there is, right? If you train a system on the questions on the bar exam and it doesn't answer the questions well, that would be the problem. So there's obviously that, but in some ways even worse is the sort of implicit assumption that people make good lawyers because they passed the bar exam, right? In fact, that's just the kind of a thing that people have to do, because people, unlike computers, do not memorize things easily.
Right.
So the minimum that you want from somebody before they start to practice and acquire the experience that makes a very good lawyer is that they pass the bar exam. And that isn't the thing that makes them a good lawyer. That's the thing that shows that as a human being without a hard drive, they have acquired the information that a lawyer should have at their fingertips in that state.
Thank you so much. And before I open this floor to our audiences for your question, your thoughts, and your suggestion there, I'd like to mention one more thing about Professor Goodlad's contribution. Really go beyond an academic. She's actively involved in initiative bridges the gap between AI research and the social factors, social and activities. So as an editor and co-founder of Critical AI, this is a new journal published at Duke University and based in Rutgers University. I understand these already published 2 values there now, and maybe some of our readers, some of our audiences do not really know much about the journal. So as editor and co-founder of Critical AI, and I understand that this journal will provide a platform for interdisciplinary discussion, critical analysis of AI's power dynamics and the social impact. We really want to listen from the editor, how what this journal is about and what kind of articles and can fit in and the aims and scope of your journal.
Sure. Thank you for that question. So to me, obviously it's about all the things that it says it's about in the long mission statement that you can read on the website, but I'm not going to recapitulate that because I don't even think I could. Unlike a language model, my storage is not that good. But what I will tell you is that, for me, the interdisciplinary part is so important. The way that AI is being commercialized and the opportunities for AI to actually do some really good things really calls upon scholars and researchers in industry to work together, especially if the goal is to produce systems that are, as alignment people like to say, safe, helpful, truthful, not harmful. And, we don't have that right now, in part because of political economy, right? The Wall Street using that as a synecdoche for all of the people who have put millions, perhaps billions of investment into AI. They want returns. They want to hear that it's growing. They want to hear that businesses are buying in. And in fact, that type of money-making adoption is slow. It's actually not surprising to me because I know a fair amount. I've worked with people who do this. I know a fair amount about what is required for a business to use something like a language model as the foundation for its own, say, customer service bot. It actually takes, you have to hire somebody to create that system for you. So I feel as if, there's one issue that involves, governments, civil society having to get involved to make sure that these technologies are more accountable to the public. And that really is to do with politics, but also educating the public. But in terms of the research paradigm, what I think the journal can help people to do is to work together better, because I see a tremendous need for humanists and interpretive social scientists to work with people who do, programming, computational linguists, data science, et cetera. And for the most part, humanists have not been consulted sometimes philosophers, occasionally anthropologists, but in very, very specialized ways. So here you have a situation where, you have a company saying like, oh, look, this, this writes so well, it will teach people to write. Did they consult any writers, people who teach writing? In fact, ChatGPT's writing is not that great. It's very formulaic. It's easy to spot. You can certainly be clever and prompt it differently, but for the most part, it's quite dull. So, right, at its best, it sounds like a Wikipedia page, and that's no surprise since it was trained on a lot of Wikipedia pages.
Thank you so much. And, I really share a lot of the points you're mentioning. ChatGPT is not a good writer at all. We can definitely tell that, sir. It's very important, like, you're mentioning, make an accountable technology and for the public interest. I know that's so good, sir. I know, and we have a lot of questions and from here and, from audiences there. Please unmute yourself and ask your question here, if you have any. Daya, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Goodlad, for a fantastic Saturday morning material for our thinking and, thinking ahead. I was just interested about a burning issue, which is about regulation of AI. And as you know, the European Union has just put something out there which now is likely to become a kind of global standard. What is happening in your country in relation to regulating this beast, which, as you describe, is really dangerous, but also very exciting? There's so many possibilities that it can bring to not just academic life, but life in general. So is there something happening beyond the corporate version of what AI is and how wonderful it is in terms of its regulation? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the $64,000 question, right? Everyone wants to know that. I think that the European Union will undoubtedly stay in the lead, and that the US will probably, end up with a pale version of whatever they are doing. But you never know. Certainly, the Biden administration quite sincerely wants to have regulations. They have an executive order that is toothless, but it would be wonderful if everything, it's actually a Bill of Rights that you would have the right to know if a decision-making system decided not to hire you or to kick you off your benefits because you're suspected of fraud, you would be entitled to appeal that, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's full of very, very good things that absolutely have to be done, and I hope will. There's also, and I'm sure this is true in Europe as well, the outcome of court cases involving copyright. That is going to be huge. And also part of what we're waiting for is just seeing like who starts to use these tools. I mean, really, I can't emphasize enough that although, yeah, roughly, I think 180 million people are using ChatGPT in the world. But there's not much information about what are those people paying for so it's not easy to get fine-grained information, and certainly that in order for it to even cover costs, much less become the lucrative trillion-dollar industry that investors are hoping for, it really needs to take off in a big way. And it's not clear to me how that will arise, at least in terms of generative AI, right? I mean, we're in a position right now where we could build, like, let's say that students appreciate having a chatbot that gives them some information about their class when their teacher is not available. You don't actually need a generative language model with all of its problems for that. You could actually go back to smaller models, different kinds of technologies that are 100% reliable and don't suffer from the various flaws of generative systems, one of which is that they get answers wrong quite frequently. So there was recently a study, for example, about a bot that involved ChatGPT being used in an intro to computer science course at Harvard. And you could tell that the people who did the study, probably young instructors, were like very excited and they felt that the students had gotten something out of it. But, you know, what they didn't actually put up front was that it was wrong as much as 1 in 5 times about computer science. And it was wrong 33% of the time about the syllabus and its policies. Now, you know, imagine if like your TA was, you know, wrong about computer science 1 in 5 times and wrong about the syllabus 1 in 3 times. So eventually the sort of excitement about generative AI will wear, and people will have a sense of what it's good for. And when that happens, especially because after all, these companies do really want to make money by charging you a lot for it, I'm not convinced that a lot of people are going to want to use it at the scale that is imagined. Other types of AI, however, you know, setting aside the sort of fascination with and anxiety about these bigger and bigger and bigger models that, you know, seem to be becoming more intelligent, and some people think that they could become too intelligent. And, you know, I find a lot of these things to be groundless, and I could say more about why I think that. I mean, you know, let me say 2 very simple things on that point. If you're worried about building models that are too big, and, you know, don't build them. You know, it almost seems to be a marketing campaign, like, oh, our model is going to be so smart that either it will save humanity or it will destroy humanity, which starts to seem like a perverse marketing campaign for people who have sort of lived in a bubble for a very long time. But the other thing that I would say about, you know, that approach is that, you know, there are other types of AI that society could be funding. The payoff would not be, you know, it's not going to be something like drives up Microsoft's stock price. It's going to be something that has a specific use. That's where we should be putting our AI dollars. So as much as regulation for data privacy, safety, transparency about environment and so forth, I would love to see more focus on funding the type of AI that actually might do good things for us.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you. Any question from the audiences? More questions there? Just feel free to unmute yourself and join the talk. Anyone? Yeah, Celine, how about you? And you know, go ahead, like talk. Unmute yourself. Are you convenient to join us?
Could you hear me? Sorry, because I'm in the hospital. Perhaps it's a bit noisy here. I hope you
she's
could.
expecting a baby. Yeah, that's.
Oh, how exciting!
Wow, thank you for joining us. Okay, go ahead.
So thank you very much for the thought-provoking talk. I was really very enlightened. Especially, I found your use of the phrase probabilistic mimic to refer to generative AI particularly intriguing. Actually, it's the first time I heard about this phrase to refer to generative AI. So I really like this the use of this phrase a lot. In your presentation, you discussed the key affordances of generative AI. Could you elaborate a bit more on the most important affordances that set generative AI apart from previous technological innovations and contribute to the broader discourse on technology and human interaction?
That's a great question, because generative AI, I mean, I'm going to talk about language models because that's what I know best, but of course I could be talking about image models. I could be talking about video models, models that make music, although not super well right now. You know, on the one hand, I think it would be ungenerous and just sort of spiteful to say that it isn't impressive that these models do what they do, right, as probabilistic mimics. But on the other hand, the amount of resources and the amount of data that really belongs to other people that was used without consent for something that is going to be put behind a paywall in order to make money, you know, it's almost as if generations of human art, communication, cultural expression have been sort of scraped up to create something proprietary for a very small number of people and companies. And I find that very, very concerning. I do think that there are probably things that we could learn about language by using the models, but I almost never feel as if those marketing the system have a good sense about that, right? So like, you know, you'll hear people say, well, like, look, they teach us about our biases. And it's like, well, they teach us about how some people are biased, right? But because you are not transparent about what your data sources are and what isn't in there and what your users are doing. I mean, yet another thing that is completely untransparent is that when, you know, underregulated though they are, if somebody is typing malicious things into, say, Facebook, they have to write a report about that, right? So they document the number of malicious users. Right now, language model, you know, marketers don't have to do that. So they haven't even got that minimal kind of thing. So I apologize. It's just very hard for me to think about them other than in terms of their harms, their questionable provenance, the way that people seem to think, or some people seem to think that it would be a good idea to use them to teach students. You know, you wouldn't need teachers to teach because you've got this robot, it's going to be personalized. People have been saying that about mechanical educational systems for more than 100 years. You know, you can actually, I mean, B.F. Skinner was interested in that type of thing, and the word personalized was actually used. So, you know, that doesn't excite me. And then there's the idea, oh, well, Mustafa Suleiman's, his inflection AI, he has something called HI, personal something is what I think it stands for. And the idea is that you're just going to, like, you know, almost like in the movie Her, you have this companion and you're going to be sort of hanging out with it. You know, I can't be excited about that. It's not the most horrible thing in the world either. I'm not histrionic about it. People sometimes worry about things more than they need to, but I can't help but compare it to, say, voice assistants. And this is something that we talk about in the new issue of Critical AI, that when Siri came out, and Google Assistant, they deliberately did not emphasize having it be a chatter, right? So, Siri has a certain amount of modeling used so that it can interpret your voice when you give it a command, but otherwise it has fairly hard-coded skills for things like searching the web. And what is striking to me about it is that, Siri, useful, all kinds of people used it. Nobody ever was worried about, is it going to take over the world? People were not led to believe that Siri was something that it wasn't. It was a kind of an engineered tool. And that's what I would like to see, the power of probabilistic mimicry or data-driven deep learning is probably the more appropriate technical term. I would like to see, hard engineered, reliable tools where you're not trying to get the person to anthropomorphize and engage in long conversations and become sort of inappropriately attached, or start to believe that they're talking to something conscious. That just seems to me to be manipulation of a kind that was firmly rejected by the tech industry, by the AI community back in the 1960s.
Thank you very much, and for this the wonderful discussion. I guess we almost done here, and but I see, and if we have one more question, that'll be fine. Otherwise, I like to prevent a little bit more comments on this. Anyone else and want to have a question?
Hi.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi. Am I audible? Hi, thank you, Professor, for that wonderful thought-provoking presentation. I'm a PhD student here, and I'm doing my research on Sino-Indian relationship, global media narratives, and the conflict around it. My first master's is also in English literature. That's why I'm asking you this question. When you talk about interdisciplinary research, the kind of language generative AI can come up with, particularly in conflict negotiations, simulations, do you think these are effective in the academic world? I know for a fact that newsrooms are very skeptical about it yet. Newsrooms like the BBC, the newsrooms in India, they're not completely depending on AI to generate news content. How is it in the academic world where you can use generative AI to understand conflict negotiation processes? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. So, and it's great that you have a degree in literature. So, I don't see how any journalism outlet could use generative AI to report the news. One of the things that AI is particularly bad at, AI of this type, is anything that is new. Right? You saw how it works with the model is what it is. It's a pre-trained model. So all you can do is prompt it with something, but it's the information that it's going to use to give you an output is what it is. And that's why there are all these efforts using things like RAG, which means getting something from the internet to improve. They're trying to sort of kludge together the more up-to-date kinds of things and the more particular kinds of things, so that becomes the input, with the hope and expectation that the output will therefore be better. And it will be better, incrementally better. But for something like the news, where you actually have to do some research, maybe interview people, the idea that like a language model is going to be able to like, pick up the phone, interview 5 sources, add that with like, what companies are saying, and come up with a news story that would be human quality. I think that I'm not sure how we will get there from where we are, if it's even possible, because it is so much of a pattern finder from what is already there. So it will come up with, that's exactly why it hallucinates, quote unquote. In other words, it has trained on tons of stories like that. Let's say you have an airplane crash. It is trained, it knows how to write something that looks convincingly like a story about an airplane crash. But is it a story about this airplane crash? Can it follow the fact that like people are like, what's going on at Boeing? Like, can it even get a sense of what it means for a company of that stature to keep running into these different things, and what that provokes, what readers would want to know? At this point, no. As far as conflict resolution, I don't really know that field at all. It seems like probably in the training data, and for this reason, searching the web or reading books on the subject is probably also a good idea. There may well be like, scripts that could be useful to bring parties together. But on the other hand, that seems to me, from the very little that I know about what is involved, probably more from movies than anything else, you would also want to have the human touch, right? Like you would want to have people who have that sort of ability to bring other people together. The idea of a conflict being mediated wholly by a chatbot, I can't help but think, ignorant though I am, that we are a very long way away from that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It sounds like an interesting dissertation topic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and for this. I think AI is definitely less democratic than Wikipedia. Well, Wikipedia, you saw that one there, the reader, user can go back and make changes here. What happened here is an AI, like you moments ago say, input and then hidden there, and then go to output. It's a hidden there. A lot of places we call black box. Sometimes we really don't know what's going on there. So,
right.
But I think, like, and your discussion, your presentation today is really highlights the importance of critical analysis of AI's power dynamics and the social impact. And we, as social scientists, want to learn from you more, and then get into the black box and see what kind of hidden layers end up to be. And so I think this is so significant to have you to keep reminding us there's a hidden layers, and always need the perspective, not just from IT experts, not just from like a tech perspective, also from the perspective of critical analysis and from the social, political, and cultural implication of the AI.
Yes, well,
Thank you once
you.
again, Professor.
Yes, it's been a
Goodlad.
pleasure. Please stay in touch. I want to hear about the dissertation, the new arrival at the hospital. All right. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, thank you, let and how we are talking about here, Thank you so much, and especially we want to thank Professor Goodlad one more time, and she chipped in at the very late and U.S.
Yes.
Eastern time, and past 10 o'clock now, and we really appreciate this and chip,
Yes.
in Friday evening, yeah.
My
And here I also
pleasure.
thank the audiences who join us Saturday morning, and we are here. We will not go hiking. We will not go somewhere else there. We come to join Professor Goodlad. So let's give her one virtual applause and then thank her and for joining us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, audience. You've been lovely, and I really appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Right. Thank you, Misra. Thank you,
Thank you
everybody.
very much, Professor.
Yeah, and